Welcome to another edition of Expanding Mind. I'm your host, Eric Davis, and we're continuing our explorations of the cultures of consciousness. The other night, actually on New Year's, I was talking with a good friend of mine who is deeply into perfume. Like, she's a highbrow mystic of perfume and is starting to make her own scents. And I'm also a scent fan. I'm not that into perfume, but I love smell. I love it. It's very rich and evocative for me. I have an unusually acute sense of smell, which is about as bad a thing as a good thing, and yet it is the thing that I have. And so I've spent a lot of time thinking and enjoying the sometimes transporting, subtle, and strange characteristics of scent. And as I was talking to my friend, she had studied semiotics at Brown, very intellectual person, and one of the things that she noted was that one of the attractions of scent is that we actually have very poor vocabulary for it. We can compare scents to other scents that we all find familiar, strawberry or, lavender, or we can try to describe it with a pretty weak set of adjectives. And so what we talked about was the way in which part of the enjoyment, the pleasure, the fascination of scent is that it eludes our ability to capture it in language. And so it kind of draws us back in. Can we make a closer pass? How can we break down a scent to try to represent it, to try to describe it, to try to evoke it in turn in language, and yet it remains ultimately elusive. It's kind of as she called it was sort of the big other, the other that you can never quite assimilate, even though you're having this relationship. I thought it was a fascinating conversation, and I thought about it again today because we're going to be talking about ayahuasca and intense psychedelic experience because we're interviewing Rak Razam, and I hope I pronounce his last name right, who is the author and filmmaker behind Aya Awakenings, which is a new, really terrific movie we'll talk about in a second. But one of the things that keeps me coming back to the language around psychedelics, the representations, the art, the music, the literature, the conversations that surround this fascinating topic is for the same kind of reason. There's something fundamentally elusive, non-linguifiable, so to coin a term, in the experience that nonetheless produces this incredibly rich kind of attempt to express, understand, communicate, share experience. And there's something about that balance that I think keeps us really honest if we're staying true to both the ineffability and overwhelming qualities of not just psychedelics, but of intense states of experience, of insight, of meditation, of ecstatic wonder, of awe. These kinds of intense spaces, they pull on our language. They pull on our expressive tools. And that said, of course, a lot of the discourse around these things, a lot of the material and media isn't always particularly interesting. You get the talking head phenomena a lot where you see, if you're watching a documentary about crazy states of consciousness, there's often the bearded white guy who's telling you something and then another guy's telling you something. And I really have to commend Rak on Aya Awakenings, which is, I think, just beginning to be available for stream on demand online. We'll get the details later, and is making its way through film festivals in the United States over the next, or film showings over the next couple months. But it's a wonderful film, and it's wonderful because it's one guy's story, someone who knows something but not a lot at the beginning. So we kind of go with him, go with Rak as he explores these worlds with pretty great cameramen. And then later on, they used a lot of wonderful post-production, some excellent animation to capture his own experience. So we go with him as he drinks the brew. We go with him through the night. The screen darkens. We see only slight traceries of light. And if people are familiar with the Jan Koeman film Blueberry, as it was in Europe, and Renegade here in the States, there were remarkable ayahuasca computer animation visuals at the end, and this film, matches that quality and really draws us into a story in a way that's a lot more engaging, I think, than the talking heads at this point. So it's very worthwhile, and I'm looking forward to talking to Rak. Maja won't be with us today, so we'll just invite Rak onto the show. Thanks for joining us on Expanding Mind. Are you there?
Hello, Erik.
There we are. Good. Wonderful. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good, thank you. I'm very pleased to be here.
Wonderful. I know it's nice and bright and early over there. What is your immediate surroundings? I imagine you in some jungle in Queensland. Am I wrong? I know you're calling from Australia.
I'm sort of very close to a suburban jungle in the outskirts of Mullumbimby, which is the unofficial psychedelic capital of Australia. It's sort of subtropical rainforest, and it's very hot here. I know America's going through a cold snap. It's very, very warm here at the moment.
Well, wonderful. Thanks for taking the time to be with us. One thing I wanted to start out is like looking at, you wrote a book and shot a documentary of essentially one journey you took in 2006 to Peru. And I'm curious, before you left on that journey, how deep were you into these issues? How interested you were in the culture? How much of your narrative of discovery really was based on your own, initial exploration into the realm?
It's a good question. There's a few different streams that sort of converge in the answer here. I was basically rebranding myself that year and getting more into writing again, coming out of some corporate work, actually. And I branded myself to Australian Penthouse, which was, the Australian franchise of the men's magazine, as a Gonzo journalist. And I'd been over to cover Albert Hoffman's 100th birthday symposium in Basel, Switzerland, for that publication and for some mainstream papers. And, I had the skill base to write about, but what I was really interested in was alternatives, counterculture, fringe culture, consciousness, spirituality. And, what happened is I went to my second assignment was to go to Peru. And when I say assignment, it's a freelance writing, so I was covering the whole thing on my own bat. But, it's quite amazing when you set your intent on a path and then, the path manifests. And I had a lot of support from very unlikely, circumstances and quarters to go to Peru, and things really wonderfully manifested. It seemed like there was something, a strange attractor drawing me there. But I went with this fresh sort of journalistic integrity that what I discovered in Basel, Switzerland, it was really about, in this experiential sense, in this Gonzo journalism sense, becoming part of the story, like really immersing myself in the culture, learning about it, and being open to it. And in that sense, you were talking at the start of the show about language and the ineffable and this ability of, trying to convey in language some of these trans-linguistic states. So as well in Peru, as well as the entheogenic or the spiritual dimension I discovered with ayahuasca, it was also a very fresh culture. So I was really happy because, I'm Gemini, and one of my favorite things is, this fresh information or fresh material. So I was in this hyperkinetic Gonzo journalistic mode where I was just writing down notes and audio recording and taking pictures and really data mining the experience of everything around me, including the Peruvian culture and the people and, the environment and all the little nuances, because all those little nuances really, in a tactile sense, they aggregate into our experience, of what we're going through. And so I was very blessed in a way to have this freshness to approach not just Peru, but to approach the ayahuasca scene and to approach what I was calling, the business of shamanism, and exploring in 2006 in Peru at that time what the mythic archetype of the shaman, or the curandero as they call them in Peru, what that really meant to our culture. I knew there was this Amazonian shaman conference that Alan Shoemaker puts on every year, which was a great snapshot, a great introduction to be introduced to different curanderos and also to the tourists, to these what I discovered in context, I feel like I'm more like seekers or pilgrims in an archaic sense, as well as thrill seekers. But there's this clash of cultures where, the capitalism and the ability to buy an experience is very much fueling the supply and demand of the rise of ayahuasca shamanism in Peru. So I was thrown into this culture clash and this whole world, and I was just really happy to have this. No matter how difficult the circumstances get, as the book does delineate quite avidly, I was there in ceremony. If the light would go out, scribbling my notes, and in the dark, taking notes, and even in some of the deep ayahuasca and DMT experiences, when the ego was dissolved, I would find it was like bungee jumping into sort of into like the Godhead is my shorthand for it. And as my ego would dissolve, the last little skerricks of consciousness would fully melt back into the ocean. And then as soon as those skerricks started to come back and congregate again, I'd be writing it down. So in a really amazing way, I feel honored to actually just to have that intent and that consciousness to be able to capture what I felt was happening in these experiences culturally, and the business of shamanism, and as well as sort of metaphysically with the inner experiences.
Yeah, journalism can give you a wonderful set of skills. I find that as well, having had the opportunity to do a lot of very interesting stories where I was in underground scenes or foreign situations and or really powerful subcultures, and developing the intent and the discrimination to be able to pull out small little details, like you mentioned, those small little bits of information that might seem very kind of peripheral at the time, but then when you collect them and you start to weave it together, you realize that's one of the ways the story is being told, and that's something that came through really well in the film and in the book. For example, you many journalists do when you're writing a piece or a profile, is you describe the clothes of people, but you pay really close attention to it, exactly what the mix is. One of the curanderos you sit with, you describe how his clothes are already mirroring the kind of transformations of ayahuasca shamanism. He's got, a sort of crazy print shirt. He's wearing sneakers, but he has traditional, feathers, and and there's this way in which your clarity of description, that kind of journalistic skills, it's really very, very helpful. And then I think even more so when you go into the more subtler spiritual cosmic implications of the things, having a little bit of that grit and some of that ability to step out and record and look at yourself it's a really rich way of being, even if one is not creating a book or a film. It's something that I think it really helps out in these kinds of situations, and that comes through. But it also sounds like this was actually something you were going through kind of in your own life. You're coming out of corporate work. You're going, hey, I don't want to do this the rest of my life. But it really was a kind of fresh. It was a fresh discovery for you as well. Say the idea that taking psychoactive substances could be as profoundly spiritual as it clearly was for you. Even that seems to be something that was a fresh discovery. It's not like you were coming there already with a sort of agenda of, I'm going to find this, and then I'm going to find the cosmic thing, and I'm going to find nature spirits. It feels like it was in that very experience was an unfolding for you as well.
Yes, very much so. Like it was very much an organic unfolding, and I think that's part of remaining on the path of integrity and not trying to force things. They say in magical work, and especially also with ayahuasca, and when we're in these sort of altered states, consciousness is everything. Consciousness is the driver, and so an attachment can often either weigh us down or change the path that we're unfolding onto. It's very good. Many people over generations now, I guess, have used psychedelics both recreationally and as a work, as a spiritual practice, and both have valid functions to them. But it really does help, and then part of the experience of ayahuasca is not just the psychic effect; it's really the cleansing, and it's really the dieta, and it's the preparation you make and the changes you make in your life leading up to a ceremony. And so to be in Peru was wonderful because it was outside my normal Western setting and that setting which has all those dynamics involved, and it allowed me to have that space to really 110% commit to the experience of experiencing, I guess, in a way. And so going into those entheogenic realms, those sort of psychic realms that ayahuasca opened up with the journalistic sort of mind frame. So really, some part of my consciousness was still, really switched on to being open to the detail and to whatever the detail was, while the other half was totally uncommitted to any outcome. So, I went to write it was basically only a 3,000-word article, and by the time I got through my first 2 weeks of drinking with about 14 different curanderos and all these ceremonies, I had so much material, I thought, well, it's obviously bigger than an article and it could be a book. But what I didn't realize at that time was it was totally freeform. It was totally freeform in the sense that I had some idea of structure of who I was drinking with next and the connections I was making on the ground, and one thing would lead on to another, as it does on the Gringo Trail of the Soul, as they called it. But there was also, what I discovered as well, was there was obviously, when I was on the journey, it became much more than just reportage and much more than just something I was doing, for a periodical. It basically revealed to me that I was on my own initiatory journey, and that the universe had basically conspired through this conceit that I was going to be a journalist, and which I was, and I was fulfilling that. But it was very much an initiation for me as well, and I think I was, in some senses, probably looking for that unconsciously. But it was quite amazing. They say that life mirrors art, and art mirrors life. And one of the framing sequences I use in the book is Joseph Campbell's heroic journey. So there's the departure from the norm, there's the initiation, and then there's the return. And so I use that structure in the book, delineating there was about 24 different journeys with curanderos all over the Amazon and Iquitos and Pucallpa and up the Amazon on this crazy mission, and back to Cuzco. And so what I discovered happening is this really weird thing. We're talking about intent again and consciousness and this magical lack of consciousness itself. Because the more I'd get to the end of one experience with a curandero, and I'd be aware that I was sort of writing this book and it was freeform, and I'd be like, right, I wonder what will happen next. And it'd be like, if it was, following the archetypal patterns, I really need something like this to happen, like I need, and then boom, it would just manifest. Like I'd bump into someone and they would send me on a journey, and I'd meet someone else, and I'd look back and I'd realize that the whole book was really guided in a very inexplicable way. I was getting towards the end of the book, or my travels, which were going to be the end of the book, and I had to sort of sum up things, and I had to have some conclusion and some final statements, and I was really wondering what was going to happen. And then I had a final ceremony with a Western curandero, Kevin Furness, and I had some of the strongest visions I've ever had to this day. And, I witnessed, again, probably my representation of this archetypal withered, wizened old Shipibo woman who was sort of like this archetypal representation of Madre, Mother Ayahuasca. And, she talked to me, and I was like, what a brilliant ending. I couldn't have written it better myself. So this whole idea of intent and of, art, life mirroring art was very pronounced, and I think that can be explained in some ways by the altered states and the ayahuasca sort of head fake, but because I was mapping that in a journalistic sense as well, it was uncannily just, I'll get what I need when I needed it in a narrative sense as well.
Well, one of the things I really appreciate about the film also is that you show some of the more, how would you say, kind of intense details of the experience. For example, there's this one of my favorite sequences in the film is where you finally have to purge your it's the middle of the night. You stumble out and you find your way, and you talk about the guides who are helping you find your way to the toilet, and this one is actually pretty snazzy comparatively, so there's actually a porcelain toilet there, and you see the toilet sort of in this film, and then there's this description of you vomit, and there's a description of the vomit, and the vomit turns into this like magic mirror, which is something that is reported in the anthropology of Amazonian shamanism for way back, where there's this kind of magical substance, and you're sitting there, you're looking at this thing, and what I liked about that is that there's so much gritty detail there. It's kind of exotic. It's kind of repulsive. It's kind of amazing. And you described it very well, and you were drawn into the intimacy of it, but you weren't really kind of reveling in the weirdness or the grossness of it. I mean, I'm thinking of, for example, like if Vice magazine had been doing, that story, that would have come through with a different kind of quality. So you were able to not whitewash the weirdness of the situation and the intensity and the physical intensity of it, but at the same time you didn't sort of revel in it. But that said, what was it like for you to decide to share to that degree of intimacy your own experiences? I mean, I'm also thinking of later in the film when you smoke 5-MeO DMT and you have quite a expressive reaction. Let's just say that for the I don't want to spoil it for people. It's kind of wonderful. And yet that's, there you are, you're on this journey, and you're recording it, you're having it go out to all these people, you're writing about it. Talk a little bit about that degree of the Gonzo, where you're really getting your own very intimate experiences as sort of objects to share for, tens of thousands of people.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for that comment. It's very nice. The key word you said there, which I totally agree with, is intimate. This is a very, very intimate film. And the very interesting thing for me, we're talking about this magical sort of, energy around it as well, is that pretty much the book has all the original notes I was taking raw. It was like, I was writing down, and when I was writing down, that they've only been lightly copy edited and hardly much at all. So the immediate emotional reaction I had in 2006 in my experiences with ayahuasca and DMT and in the jungle was translated to words. And we were saying before about these nuances and to find the right words. And I had this journalistic sort of headspace, but beyond that, I really had a heart space. I really had a very, very open, intimate heart space to find the right words, and I was even learning about language because I was in this sort of feedback loop in these states. It's just that it was opening me up to what language was really about and how we encapsulate in language energy. It's in the vibration of codes because I was learning about vibration with the curanderos, about their icaros or magic songs, about how they really heal. And it's not just about the physical neurochemical structure of ayahuasca or the adjunct plants from the brew. They're all there to sort of open up the pathways, but they use sound. It's the power of sound and vibration and channeling the different vibrational codes of other plants that they then infuse into the patient's vibrational field, their energy body, with their healing. So all of this was sort of in my world view and understanding. I was opening up to the power of language while I was also opening up my heart. And so it is a very intimate account, and the book, the written descriptions in the book are those raw experiences. Like, I think something anchored in that, like something really directly anchored from the experiences to the book. And when we came around to making the film, we had to condense down, on almost 500-page book, 30 chapters, to basically the broad overarching strokes of what it was about, the thrust of the themes about the global shamanic resurgence, introducing ayahuasca, using my journey as a catalyst for the collective journey for this generation of Western seekers who are engaging with plant medicines, and ayahuasca is just one of them. And that's all there in the narrative of the film, but we actually used the exact narration from the book. Like, it's all the words you hear in the film are directly lifted from the book. So it was, in some senses, a more difficult way to make a documentary film. Like, it's very much, I say, it is nonfiction. It is a documentary, but it's so far beyond even those genre labels. It's really an experiential Gonzo, narrative documentary that really anchors these experiences. So using the narration from the book has that emotional intimacy that anchors it to the original things that were happening. And so, I did have to choose what I was showing. I didn't want to whitewash it at all. Many people have some type of sensitivity around, vomiting and purging, and that's one of the key things around ayahuasca. Not everyone purges, but it's one of the most common reactions. But it's a bodily cleanse. It can be a bodily cleanse, and it can be, the curanderos believe in their cosmovision, it's also an energetic cleanse, and you're helping clean things that may be lodged in your energetic system or your emotional body, and that can be coming up in the vomit as well. So, it needed to be represented. And so, in a way, using the narration from the book and that key sequence from the Jungle Fever chapter with curandero Percy Garcia, that was one of my introductory ayahuasca experiences, and it was when I was first in the jungle, and it was first in that, I call it the great green womb, going back to the great mother and being embedded within this ecosystem of energy, which is so alive and so vibrant, and so to do ayahuasca in that environment really brings a charge to the experience. And so yeah, that sequence shows the purging, and there's some other purging sequences later because, well, frankly, that's what happened every ayahuasca experience I was in with other Western seekers on the Gringo Trail as well, is that everyone would purge, and it was a very intimate moment. And, we have to cut it back a bit here and there, but the book goes into more detail about this intimacy that ayahuasca seekers share when you're in ceremony together. And I find that for me, it opens up my sensitivity, and I'm completely open. So if someone coughs or someone, murmurs, or usually in the sound they make, there's an energy, and, some people can make some type of a roused sound or a sad sound or a weeping sound. And it's the vibration of that sound which carries like a carrier wave their energy. And in ceremony, the sensitivity of people in ceremony is so open that that energy can be transferred. So it happens a lot, and it is a very intimate zone. And I feel that we all share an intimacy and a togetherness once we've shared a ceremony together, people in ceremony. So, I think that's a plus for the film. I think unlike most of the other ayahuasca documentaries, as you said, which have in some sense, of talking heads and interviews, and they're talking about the experience, and they've got maybe some beautiful footage, and they're all good, they're all fantastic, some beautiful other films out there. But Aya Awakenings is actually a shamanic artifact. It anchors these emotional states, it anchors these trans-dimensional states and trans-linguistic states, and it makes it real. We take the viewer on the same journey I went on, and it's a very, very big journey. Like, it does move people. We've done test screenings in Australia, and we've had people that have had basically vibrational flashbacks who have had medicine, and it really brings that energy back on again in their energetic bodies. And people who haven't experienced anything like this, it is the closest they're going to get to the experience without the experience itself. And just the last thing you're talking about, one of the key, I guess the climax of the film, at least energetically, is an experiment which was, again, it was just in the organic unfolding. One day there in 2006, we went out to a very beautiful man, Ron Wheelock, who's a Western curandero. He's been on the path for over a decade now, and he's learned a lot of indigenous curanderos, and he was also experimenting at the time with 5-MeO, smokable 5-MeO DMT, which was legal at that time, throughout the world. It was only became illegal, I think, in around 2009 after the Tryptamine Palace book made it a bit more public knowledge. But that was basically it was one of my 2 or 3 deepest spiritual experiences of my life, and we were just very lucky at the time that the media crew I was traveling with were filming, and so we filmed the outside flesh body, and that's all it is. There is a very dynamic reaction at the end of that sequence. But, as I try to say in there, we were filming the outside flesh body, but the true miracle is on the inside. The true miracle is this trans-linguistic thing, and it was the archetypal white light tunnel experience. But again, it's all in the words, It's all in the ability to sift meaning and to sift emotional meaning and then to be able to convey that. So I was very, very lucky at that time to have been done, half a dozen or so ayahuasca ceremonies. So I was very clean energetically and I was very sharp journalistically. And then I went into a very, very powerful 5-MeO DMT white light tunnel experience with full consciousness. And so it was like lucid dreaming. And so I was totally conscious for the whole thing, to the point of, it felt like some, super hadron collider of the soul, where as I was merging as the drop into the ocean was actually revealing in an equal and opposite sort of carrier wave of energy that it was within me and had always been within me and was animating me. And when I'm feeling these things in these states, with that part of my mind that is deconstructing and analyzing in a journalistic sense, it feels like truth to me, and I was doing my best to convey that truth with these little words, these little Ninos, I call them, the little children, these little vibrational rappers to mint crisp the emotional experience and to convey that in the baseline world. So that 5-MeO sequence is definitely it is definitely pretty out there because we captured the whole experience on the outside, and then we recreated on the inside with some beautiful organic unfolding fractal imagery that Tim Parish, the director, made, and some electric sheep. But it's very fresh. It's not a very Hollywood type of special effects. They're very organic and very natural and unfolding.
Yeah, I was going to say once again the special effects really make a difference on this one because they do communicate something, not just in the visual zowiness of it all, but the patterns and the sense of an organic unfolding is it communicates really deeply to the viewer on another level. But we have to take a break right now. You're listening to Expanding Mind. We're talking with Rak. How do you pronounce your last name, Rak?
Razam.
Razam. All right, we're talking with Rak Razam about Aya Awakenings, and we'll be right back.
Okay.
Welcome back to Expanding Mind on the Progressive Radio Network. I'm your host, Erik Davis, and we're speaking with Rak Razam about Aya Awakenings. You had the good fortune to be able to drink with many different curanderos during your voyage, as well as some, including some gringos. And I'm just kind of curious, one, just what did you learn about the whole ayahuasca culture, the whole transformative experience, the whole healing culture, by seeing so many different fellows, mostly, do their due? In terms of different personalities, how much does the personality of the shaman create the space, their singing, their brew, how various is it? Because this is something that a lot of people, even people who go down there, want to have this experience. They're like, how do I find someone who's there? Da da da. So, could you reflect a little bit about the sort of all these amazing characters you met and how they kind of shaped your own experience?
Definitely, it's a big question actually, because I went there in 2006, and I could even see then. I think my shorthand in the book was that it was like Goa, the beachside sort of town in India where the trance scene became really big. But it was like Goa just before it broke, and that was exactly what's happened actually. Because in 2006, the tourism was increasing, and there's a lot of cultural issues embedded within the ayahuasca tourism industry. And, number one is this supply and demand issue. So, I was told by many people in the Iquitos that indigenous shamanism, or more accurately, the Mestizo indigenous shamanism there in Peru, was in danger of sort of falling away because it's such a rigorous path, and people are usually chosen either the hereditary route or a route through sickness and initiation through sickness, and then it's all consuming. As a life path, it really takes a lot of isolation and of giving up a lot of things in life with the dieta to attain the sensitivity to be able to hear and communicate with plants and to learn all the healing modalities involved in that. So a lot of the indigenous youth, at least around Iquitos and the Amazonian areas of Peru, were not wanting to take up that path. And this is because at the same time, Western globalization was encroaching in, and it was all about moving to the cities and getting on with it. But then at the same time that happened, then all these Westerners started to trickle and then started to become a bit more of a flood with this interest in shamanism. And so there's been many, many lodges that have set up over the last 20 or so years now, and they're catering for Westerners, which is great in some senses because, without that it's a very rigorous and hard path. A lot of the older village shamans are just really remote and out in the middle of nowhere. So in some senses it's made it more accessible, but it's also, there's been this cross-pollination of cultures where the curanderos, to a very large degree, they're giving Westerners what they want, whether that is more trichruna, more DMT in the brews, or a bit of a kick in the brews, or making the lodges a bit of a sort of ayahuasca light type environment, so they have a nice catered food and they're all a bit of yoga here and there. And, there's just a cultural sort of trade-off. So what I learned in 2006, it was quite invaluable that I did drink with 24 or more different curanderos, including some Westerners, just to really not attach to anyone and not be in this position. I think in some senses I was wanting to find the one. There's all these metaphors which sort of resonate between ayahuasca and love in a way, or romance or maybe even the sexual sort of quest, because we're all looking for the one, and then it's like this peak experience, and then to a large degree, the curanderos can be idolized, and there's this guru sort of energy around them. And, my number one warning, which isn't really in the film because the film had to accurately portray my experiences at the time, but since that time, the industry has really grown quite a lot, and a lot of people in Peru are setting up shop and calling themselves shamans where they might not have a very deep relationship with the plants or history with the plants. But there's just such a demand, and the money that that's bringing is sort of upsetting the social apple cart that everyone is really wanting to satisfy the Western demand. I say in the book that, Peru has seen booms before. They had the rubber boom at the turn of the 19th century, then they had an oil boom in the mid-20th century, and now they've got an ayahuasca boom. And then each time, Western interests have gone down with the money and extracted the natural resource. So there's a lot of issues around that as well, and the sustainability of ayahuasca, and a lot of ayahuasca is now being exported out of the Amazon to Westerners who, have been down there and are continuing their practice. So there's so many cultural issues. It's really, I feel like we're the generation who needs to integrate the learnings and to anchor this shamanic revival that's happening and make it palatable and make it sustainable. But my experiences in drinking with the different curanderos was invaluable because I could see different styles of practice. There's, to a large degree, most of them in the Peruvian tradition, there's one main tribe, the Shipibo tribe, and they do ceremonies in the dark. It's total darkness, and it's singing all night, and the curandero is fearing the energy that's created in the group circuit in the ceremony, and he's fearing that through hyperspace, basically, with his singing and songs. And so there would be quite a lot of songs that I would hear from many different curanderos that were the same, that they'd either learnt or they'd been transmitted through the plants to them, through the doctores, the plants to the curanderos. And there's just such a beautiful vibrational imprint I've got from that pure energy of, the Shipibo songs. I like that since I've come back, in the years since and sat many times in Western-style ceremonies, which are quite often, wearing white or doing bhajans or Western medicine songs with English lyrics. And it creates a very different dynamic with candle lights or lit. There's a very different dynamic to that, and each modality has its pluses and minuses, and the evolution of the art form of holding space in ceremonies and facilitating the healing of people in ayahuasca ceremonies needs to mutate in the West. It needs to retrofit to fit different communities around the world.
Absolutely. One question I have for you is I know less about shamanism or ayahuasca cultures in Peru. I mean, I knew about the Shipibo and some of the indigenous work, but when you turn to Brazil, it's like, in a way, the expression of ayahuasca culturally in Brazil is as much about mestizo culture as it is about indigeneity. Like, there's a lot of indigenous use, yes, but there's also extremely important long-lived forms of mestizo use, where you have mixtures, people who are rubber trappers, people who come from cities, and it goes into cities. So there's all, even before Euro Americans become interested in ayahuasca in Brazil, there's already this wide range of responses, which we see even in the major groups that we know about. I'm not sure if that's as much the case in Peru in general, but one example of that you do find are these old gringos who've gone there, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, who've been going for a long time and really went for it. This kind of like these characters who just plunge right in. And I'm wondering if you, from their experience or getting to know them or other forms of mestizo ayahuasca use in Peru, whether you have some more glimmerings of how this culture will evolve as it moves out of an indigenous context, for better and in some cases for worse, into a global world where there's much more interchange and communication between different times and spaces.
I totally do, and thank you for that. It's a very good question because, this film and the book are basically the crest of the last 7 years of my life in documenting what I went through and what I learned. But on the ground in the last 7 years and the relationships I've been building, I've done quite a few tours of the States and talked with ayahuasca and shamanic practitioners all across the world. And that's really what I see. That's sort of the conclusion of the book and the film, that there is basically this, what I call the global shamanic resurgence. It's this part of, I guess, Terence McKenna's idea of the archaic revival, which contains a multitude of different things, but this core concept of having a spiritual practice through entheogenic plants. And it's not just ayahuasca, it's become the most popular and the most accessible, partially because of the legality all through South America, and it's still legal in many parts of the world, although it's a grey area of the law and it hasn't specifically been legislated against. But what I see happening, and I do a podcast too called In a Perfect World, and I interview a lot of people, over the years who are shamanic practitioners. And a lot of my friends and acquaintances that I meet are all in the shamanic world. And there's so many beautiful people, and I use this metaphor of seeds in the book and the film, and I really feel that these seeds are being awakened to what we have within ourselves and there's a need. The planet, I believe, is producing or excreting these psychoactive substances specifically for, humans to consume them. It's like they're designed to fit with our, neurological systems and to open up these expanses of the mind and of the soul within us. And we all know that, Richard Nixon started the war on drugs 41 odd years ago. And before that, though, that's just the latest iteration, because there's been a war on basically plant-based shamanism for at least the last 500 years or so, as Western culture and imperialist culture has gone out to the indigenous tribes around the world, where they retained entheogenic plants like the San Pedro cactus or even the ayahuasca and things like that, the psilocybin mushrooms. These cultures, when they've encountered the West, and usually the church, the Christian church, Catholic church, pioneering that. There's been the Inquisitions, there's been these pogroms where we basically, Western culture, and McKenna called this dominator culture, in its quest to dominate, in its quest to really control the physical baseline reality and resources and the money and the empire, it had to extinguish our connection with soul. Now, another, conclusion of the film and the book is that we don't necessarily need an entheogenic plant to connect us to our soul, right? All pathways lead to the same central source in the end. They're all valid, and what works for one person might not work for another. But if we incorporate the remembrance of the planet herself as a living entity, as this Gaian sort of entity, and we incorporate the fact that she does excrete these, what both McKenna and Bear Owsley, the famous 60s acid chemist, called exopheromones. They suggested that the planet is secreting these substances because the human species is at a stage where it's like a puberty or initiation. We need to be initiated, and we need to remember what is within us. They've done recent studies with the psilocybin mushrooms, the legal studies for the psilocybin mushrooms in the UK and the US, where they proved that what the psilocybin is doing is it's shutting off the default backbrain mechanism. And the experience you're having on the psilocybin mushrooms isn't necessarily caused by the psilocybin. It's shutting off a part of the brain and allowing the mind at large to connect with, the etheric sort of cosmic ecosystem that's out there. And so the fact that there's indigenous people like the shamans of the Amazon and medicine people across the world who have retained the knowledge of these plants is striking and is very necessary, because they've been the guardians of the threshold. And now, karmically, in a really weird way, after hundreds of years of dominated culture trying to sever the connection we had with the plants and through the plants the planet, they have this generational resurgence of people that are interested in shamanism. And again, it's supply and demand. It's really about this psychic build-up where the battery farm of Western culture, as the globalization encroaches across the world with all its free trade agreements and all its austerity measures, and the heartache that it's causing as a paradigm to the real people in the world, it creates an imbalance, and it creates an equal and opposite reaction. And so I feel there's this build-up of soul ache for remembrance and reconnection to soul and to spirit and to meaning in people's lives. And all pathways are valid, but the planet is specifically giving us these tools all across the planet. Not just ayahuasca, but every landscape and every ecosystem has its own specific entheogenic sacrament and medicine people that remember how to use it. And now they are reaching out to this generation of Westerners of all age groups and all genders and all sort of socioeconomic backgrounds, because everyone who feels the call to spirit is answering it. And if you look at
it's very interesting with
shamanism.
with psilocybe mushrooms or other varieties of magic mushrooms is that anthropologically, as far as we can strongly know, some people think it was much more widespread, although the evidence, at least that I look at, it seems kind of, nothing more than suggestive, is that there's actually only a few communities that were really gung-ho about psychoactive mushroom use. That's pretty interesting, because usually you think about human beings being like pretty resourceful, and one way or another they're going to figure out what they can use. And then, and people started discovering that, and then people realized in, only the last 40 years that these mushrooms are everywhere. They're everywhere. And so even in that case, even to talk about another example other than ayahuasca, there's the sense of a certain kind of, the coming of the mushroom, the sort of arrival of it on the global stage. But I wanted to ask about another element, which is that there is if pardon the phrase, a dark side of shamanism. And what I mean by that is not the fact that there are some people who call themselves shamans, even people who are legitimately shamans who are not good people, and there's some heinous stories of excesses and cruelties and violence in South America. But that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is how in the worldview itself, the worldview that has this sense of a connection with the other mind of nature, with the other minds of animals, of other plants, this sort of woven web work of integration of human and non-human, the balance, the idea of balance between forces, et cetera, that within that world there's also a strong tradition of essentially witchcraft or black magic or brujeria, or using that kind of that world for psychic battles. And that's in the anthropological lore. It's in the experience of people who go down and spend a lot of time there. Shamans will talk about it. It's out there. It's a important fact. And so what I wonder about is, when you think about the positive role that this most likely is playing in the awakening and the soul food for human beings who are stuck in these, post-industrial nightmares, all the positive force that's coming through, how do you see the role of that side of things, the sort of the shadowy or sinister side of the space, the practices, the traditional communities? I mean, I'm not trying to overplay that, but I do think it's a really important question to ask as we, think about how the West is changing these substances and these cultures and kind of mapping its own kind of shamanism.
I totally agree. I mean, this is the thing, all of these substances are tools, and of course, with any tool, it can be used to harm or to heal. And so the indigenous curanderos that I trained with would say that ayahuasca is 70% light, 30% dark, or they all have their own story about it. But what they acknowledge is that there's a light and dark to everything. And they acknowledge that because, in a sense, they're a bit more real, in a sense, because they're coming from the jungle, they're coming from this environment where you can die almost any time. They live in that jungle, and a lot of the mestizo shamans would be in the towns or the cities, but there was still this remembrance of the visceral type of reality of the jungle and of life itself. And so that's where they'll get ayahuasca from. And I really feel that it's the cultural imprint of South America and of the way their culture is different in some ways from the West. But brujeria is a very immediate concern in the ayahuasca communities in South America. It basically translates into negative intent. It's like black magic, but it can be the smallest thing. It could be gossip. It could be the way you spread a rumor about somebody to hurt them, or that you said something negative. On an astral sense, the curanderos quite often. I trained with one curandero, Don Juan Tangoa Pain, and he was, from his statements, he was continuously under attack by up to 9 shamans every time he did ayahuasca. And there was obviously something that had gone on in his past there, and I think he'd been involved with bringing in an oil company, and he was a tracker, and he'd had a history and a legacy. But basically the more power they believe, the more power they have as a curandero and as a shaman, the more they sort of glow on the astral, or the more a target they are. And then so there's this cultural conceit where they're trying to bring everyone down again, or to steal their power or take their power. And in some ways it reflects the jungle itself, the eat or be eaten type of idea. And so it's very much about power in the world of the shamans in Peru, even if you don't believe in it. Pablo Amaringo is famously on record, the famous visionary painter. He trained as a curandero, and he stopped on his path of shamanism as a curandero because he said he could not kill. And what he was being asked to do to survive in the dynamic of the competition of shamanism with the other curanderos is that they would throw darts, these astral darts called vibrating, which have negative intent in them, and they can manifest as illness or kill. And he knew that he would have to face other curanderos and kill or be killed, and he refused to do that, so he stepped away from the path. Now, all of that is sort of whitewashed or greenwashed when ayahuasca is getting commodified in a physical sense, but also culturally it's getting commodified. It's the great mother, and it's the healer, and this wonderful plant, medicine, which is all true. But it's a tool, and it has a legacy, and it has a connection to its origin point. And the ability for people to do brujeria, I think, is just starting in the West, because we haven't had that initial setting where we've been in competition with other curanderos. But the business of shamanism is such that, there's obviously energetics around that. And ayahuasca can be used either way. It's a tool that opens up this astral dimension, and then once you're in that dimension, it's up to the integrity of the person to travel in that or to do what they will, whether that's for healing or not. And so, people need to understand this. People need to not mythologize as much ayahuasca and experience as it mutates in the West. And as we bring it into new settings, it may be that we have a bit of fresh, virgin sort of astral landscape where I don't know exactly how it works. Like if the astral is non-local and geographically non-local, if ayahuasca builds as a force on the astral, it's almost like a virtual world, yeah? It's like colonizing Second Life or something. If we become too obvious out there on the astral, we could be bringing in the ire of the shaman to jealous or even other entities. And I was at the MAPS conference in San Francisco in April last year, and we had an ayahuasca community meeting, which discussed, amongst other things, the fallout from the teenager who died at the Shimbre Lodge in Puerto Maldonado in late 2012, and the need for a duty of care at these lodges and in the community in general, and the need for autonomous self-organization and ensuring that people are looked after, and all these industry-type practical things that really need to be done and are being done. But what Dr. Jacques Nabit said from the Takawaski Clinic, he said, look, one of the biggest problems he foresees is that people don't really take on the full gamut of the indigenous paradigm. Yeah. They don't believe that there are entities out there.
That's very key. But, I'm sorry, we're going to have to wrap it up here, and I wanted to give you a chance to tell people about where they can find out more information about upcoming events. But before I let you do that, just one comment is that I really appreciate your comments, particularly right now, because I think these things are very important as well, and that there is, whatever you want to call it, greenwashing going on, and I encourage you to continue the journalistic side of your work as well in drawing attention and making sure that these dialogues continue to happen in a very strong way as this process continues. So good luck with that, but let us know where we can find out more information about the film and upcoming showings.
Great. Well, I'd love to invite the general community of listeners to come be part of that discussion, because we're doing film screenings across the U.S. starting January 16 in New York City. Our main website is www.aya-awakenings.com, and we have the full USA event tour listings there. We're doing screenings of the film in New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Austin, Chicago, Santa Cruz, Los Angeles, Portland, San Francisco, and Vancouver. And what we're doing with the film, we screen the film, and the film is like the medicine, but the community discussion afterwards, which I do encourage people to come along to, we will discuss a lot of these points about ayahuasca culture and about shamanism, about the integration. And we're doing a live webinar on Wednesday the 8th with Reality Sandwich and the Evolver Network. You can see the link to that at aya-awakenings.com/webinar. And that's got the link with Dennis McKenna, Nick Schultz from DMT Spirit Molecule, and Richard Meach from Divine Souls. and myself and Tim Parish, the director of the film.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, Rak. Good luck with that. I'll actually be at the San Francisco event for people who are listening, and I look forward to that. And good luck with your tour.
Great. Thanks so much for talking with me, Erik. I really appreciate it.
Thanks very much. All right, from Erik, to all you out there, keep your minds open.